did I teach you?
You are Duke of New York. You're a number one.
I can't hear you.
You are the Duke of New York. You're a number one. Peace, Nobles. Hope everybody's well. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. Excellent. Great. Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. Excellent. Hope all's been well for everybody, as well as it can be. We have another great, glorious day in the apocalypse. As usual, everything is jumping off the chain. A lot of things being exposed. It's been a week since CERN been turned off, allegedly, and a lot of things have been switching up. If you've noticed, things that look somewhat insurmountable seem to be switching up and going in the favor of the righteous, which is always a good thing. Yes, indeed, Brother Brock, you said the solar flares are not playing. Yeah, they not. They not. They shorten out a lot of things. People are becoming more prudent when it comes to the things happening in their environment, what they not having, what they not considering as a real thing that people should be dealing with, namely like the flock cameras. They coming down. Whether there's legislation for them or against them or not, people are not having it. People are cutting them shits down 10 at a time in certain places. So that's good. At the same time, there's been a heavy blowback against the data centers that they trying to build up in everybody's backyard. Especially now that the pictures that came out from China, where they showing how the Chinese got AI data centers and you wouldn't even know they exist. How a lot of them is not. They don't even have to use water. They got them shits hooked up to solar panels. They putting them in the ocean. You know, they are really pushing back against that. They're pushing also against Palantir. Palantir been thrown out of at least 15 European countries so far, as well as different states is also starting to come back and say that they don't want any Palantir products, any flock products in a situation, especially now that it's been exposed that pigs, i.e., dirty police, have been using flock cameras to spy on their exes and entrap they gay lovers and all the other stuff that they've been doing. You can research this yourself. This is a thing. So again, the law can't be trusted to uphold the law. So they going ham on these people. They not having it, which again is a good thing for us. You know what I'm saying? Because we don't need that type of surveillance, because all of that surveillance is against the law. You only surveil people that you are untrustworthy and against. And because the government itself does not have the right to exist without the governing and consent of the original people, they are basically violating their own laws by even approaching the fact that they should be using them like that. So it's basically a win-win for all of us, you know what I'm saying? Which is a good thing. Um, what else was I gonna say? So yeah, so that's been popping, and that's been happening. So that's a good thing, like I said. Um, I'm trying to think of what else has been going on. It's been coming more and more. It's been coming out regards to the murders and these hangings that have been going on with all of these original men and women around the country. This is all, to me, again, in my opinion, just based on the pattern recognition. This is all Mossad, CIA type backing, because now that so-called Israel done lost ground, the way that they've lost ground to the point where straight sellout shills like the Democrats are the ones that actually voted against the NDAA and the points in it that would have merged the United States military with the small hat military. The fact that that was shut down by the Democrats is really crazy. I'd have never thought I'd have seen a day where they actually stand up for something other than taking money from them and supporting all types of communists and trans um, rights, trans right activism. They basically flipped that and even got this sellout Cory Booker, one of the most brown nosy communist pieces of shit that you would ever. You think Sharpton's bad? This nigga, he is the ultimate sellout. And they got that nigga to come out and say, nah, we not going to back this. We need to keep our military separate. Like, what? So that's a major shift in policy right now that I'd have never thought I'd seen. I really thought they was going to push that shit through so they could start coming at and trying to get everybody. But that got shut down. So with all of this happening, while at the same time, the Iranian quagmire is going that much further down the drain, you gotta understand that this has set a precedent. You know what I mean, in terms of not only the American people versus the United States, but the idea that they are no longer just willy-nilly out here doing what they want to do without any pushback. Like the fact that these things are happening, it's not looking good for Donnie, especially for the fact that once the midterms come through, this nigga is gonna basically, um, he's gonna be impeached regardless. You understand what I'm saying? Like that is going to happen, and this time it may actually go through. Remember, he's been the most impeached president in history. He had three, I think, so far, and they didn't go through. That's because the American people were backing him because he allegedly was against, the so-called deep state and Epstein and this and that. But now, with everything that he's done, specifically the war, you know what I mean? It's not looking good for him, to the point where they are literally going to not only impeach him, but they're going to basically try to go for everybody that this nigga has been using to do that. Andrew Tate and them got arrested yesterday. And that's interesting because the guy who helped get them out and from Romania and bring them back over here, that guy is connected to DJT's cabinet. He's friends with the nigga who who is standing up to say that that he was the one who introduced Melania and Trump, so that way they could move away from them being introduced through Ghislaine and Jeffrey. So this guy also was the reason why Melania had to do that little fake press conference real quick, because that guy was able to get Trump through ICE to deport his baby moms, who allegedly was Melania's best friend, who then agreed that she was basically going to drop dime on the whole situation. So now that the UK government is basically totally fascist and communist, they're basically going to use them as a means to embarrass Donald, as well as bring up aspects of the Epstein situation that they want to get into, which is ironic because it also came out recently. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, I did the video and I showed y'all how they had set up rape camps, how there's rape camps out there that's being run by these inbred Pakistani and some African and Saudi and these crazy inbred Muslims who have been out there literally gang raping children, white female children in particular, killing them, raping them, and how even there was police people who not only knew about it, but because they were Muslim and stuff, they actually joined in on the rapes. So the fact that they ignoring all of that just so that way they could get at the Tates in them really says a lot. Because also you got to remember, Tate's father was a CIA operative, which basically makes him a CIA operative by proxy. And remember, these charges that they bringing up against these niggas, these is old charges that was already in Britain, in Albion, and they moved to Romania. One, because of the corrupt government out there, number one, and then number two, they did it so that way they could duck those charges that had already been brewing in that, because they was running they own little, human trafficking ring or whatever, allegedly, or whatever. So it's not looking good, but it also shows, like I said, how these people have been being used by different elements of the country to basically do the same thing from one place to the next, because they're all human trafficking. All governments are human traffickers, you know what I'm saying, to the most part, especially nowadays, because they are allowing a certain degree of their populace to be murdered and killed, you know what I'm saying, just so that way they can justify creating new laws and things like that they can move forward through, which is where the NDAA actually came from. Remember, that was some bullshit that was created by Cheney, who created the unit. What was it? The the unitary theory that he was running the government through Bush. So all of this is some fake shit. All of this is some contrived shit that they basically using to create one circumstance over the other. So with all of that being said, all of this happened within a week, like I said, of CERN being shut down. So it's very interesting that this is happening. On another tip, it came out that allegedly that this nigga Kai Cenat, um, with his little streamer university shit, where he's supposedly, been getting all of these different streamers and whatever to come through, that a lot of them allegedly are the children of a lot of these people who are in government and in different elements of the entertainment business themselves. You know what I'm saying? So there's that too. You know what I mean? So you got all of these different circumstances all at play at the same time. So it doesn't really look like everybody's on the same page. Another reason why, another thing that's happening is the systematic reevaluation of the music industry in total, because of the fact that, you asking yourself, well, why would a billionaire, if we're going to call people like Jay-Z, using him as an example, why would a billionaire be out here doing shows, like, you know what I'm saying, like, why would he be doing that? Why would he be trying to push these vinyls? Why would he be trying to sell music that's 30 years old? Well, that's because the music as we understand it is just all now being, basically, they're trying to tokenize it. And so they're trying to show that their catalogs actually are making money, because what's actually really happening is that the way that the music industry has been imploding on itself for quite a few years now. Drake, right? The real reason why they don't like Drake is because Drake, again, was the number one artist in music, period. Drake has more streams and more sales than every member of the industry that showed up on stage with Mr. Carter and the Carters at the thing. Now take that into to really understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that that one artist, that him by himself, that all of those artists together didn't even make, don't even make 10%, excuse me, 5% of his overall catalog. So all of them together don't make one, don't generate more than this one artist. So because they are trying to sell UMG to a notorious piece of shit, I forget his name. He's a French guy. He's a real piece of shit though, this guy. But he's notorious for coming in and people always sucking him off because he allegedly has all of this money. But he traditionally never wants to pay full price for something. So, UMG Universal, they wanted to sell to him because the payout would have been dope. But see, what Aubrey did was he hooked up with this other platform called Gamma. And Gamma basically gave him the type of equity in which he would be able to basically take pieces or money from a lot of the artists that are making and signed to these different things today, because a lot of those people are being, a lot of their catalogs are being bought up by private equity firms. So what that means is they, in order for Universal to make it go through, so that way they could get more out of the deal, they wanted to create a circumstance um to devalue their number one artist, who technically is making almost as much, if not more, than the label itself. So they needed a way to devalue his catalog so that way he could be brought down. You see what I'm saying? And that way they could now negotiate him at a lower rate so that way they could get more out of the deal on the back end. So he, being smart enough to wait, he waited for a lot of the heat to die down so that way he could basically release these 3 albums that came out, right, which then brought him right back up to where he was at, if not more so. So because a lot of these other artists are not making as much as him, and because they know that they don't have the stimulus package that goes along with working with him anymore, they wanted to find a way to up the price of their catalogs as well. Because remember, the tide lifts all boats. You know what I'm saying? One tide will lift all of the boats at the same time. So they looking at it like, okay, well, let's jump behind this nigga to do that. Because they have to remember, they're trying to get their catalogs bought by private equity as well, but they don't have as much equity in the game as this one artist. So they needed to find a way to devalue him. So this is where the Kendrick Lamar situation comes in. See what I'm saying? Where now everybody in the industry dog piles on top of this nigga, you know what I mean? And then basically make it so that way the whole world is looking at him as somebody that is not, hip hop and this and that. Now, granted, I'm not really a fan of Aubrey like that. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying in terms of the overall play, I'm showing you how there is no loyalty when it comes to the industry. And so one of the main alleged orchestrators of this, whenever they need to break something, a movement, they always got to get your boy Sean involved. So this is where Sean was able to bring this nigga into the Super Bowl. And then this is where the whole, you're a pedophile and all this other type of shit goes down. And he's able to basically do that. But who signed him up for that? The same nigga who snaked, what's his name? Who snaked Kaepernick, right? Because think about it. Kendrick Lamar and Drake was on the same exact label. You see what I'm saying? They were on the same label. So it's not like there was some sort of separation between church and state, for lack of a better word. This is just basically how it's all running, because there is no money in it the way that it used to be. Now the only thing that's making money is what they can apply it to. So now they're trying to monetize these artists' catalogs as a means for them to make money. And thus this is where the whole "they not like us" campaign and all, that's why it was everywhere. That's why it was just so crazy. So now that none of this has worked, you understand what I'm saying? These niggas got to get back on the road. That's why because none of the newer catalogs of any of these artists that's out here right now is making any of that money. You know what I'm saying? None of it, none of the new stuff, like the mumble rap catalogs and that, niggas is not paying top dollar for, you know what I mean, Cardi and the rest of these types of people. They're not really doing that. Travis maybe, you know what I mean, but for the majority of those guys, it's not really like that. You know what I mean? With the exception of artists like Travis and Don Toliver, Gunna. You see what I'm saying? But these guys have a whole different clientele. They're more, they've reconstructed their whole situation to go for more upmarket value. You know what I mean? They are now changing a lot of their tactics to appeal more to, successful type of men and women in that's trying to move up the so-called echelon, not these kids that don't know how to read and all of that. Yes, Kushner and them, they are now basically not only being investigated by Albania, but they're about to put warrants out for them due to the corruption, because they're about to get rid of the Albanian president and the whole government that set all of that whole shit up. So that's going to also bring it all out. You see what I'm saying? So you're witnessing a collapse. Not only that, but then you have the fact that it's all now convalesced around this guy going to China. And when he went to China, he made a very drastic mistake. He kind of put himself in the hairs of something that he shouldn't have done. Um, what else has happened? Oh yeah, the Odyssey. I don't know if anybody in the class has seen that. If you have, let me know. But that was just really, really a waste of time. It was horrible. You know what I mean? Like watching that shit made Troy look Oscar worthy. You know what I mean? It's really not a good look. But really wasn't made for that. It was actually made as a last ditch effort for them to try to push the trans DEI situation heavy. That's why they had to get somebody to represent everybody in the movie that people don't really expect or respect as a cultural thing. Like they got Elliot Page in there, excuse me, they got Ellen Page in there, playing a character that wasn't even in the Odyssey. You know what I'm saying? Because the character that it's playing was actually supposed to be done by Achilles. It was actually the character was supposed to be in the story, was supposed to be Achilles, but it wasn't. They didn't use him. They replaced it with Synod, which again is not even in the Odyssey or the Iliad. You know what I mean? This is just a whole nother character that they just wanted to do that. Also, they took the mythological elements out of it, which then made it very, very contrite and boring. And it was really just a DEI fest, because Nolan is the only director that actually makes money in Hollywood. You know what I'm saying? He the only one that really make bread. So because of that, they wanted to use him as a means to put out something that they could then show to the shareholders that, see, nah, we still, it doesn't make money, but some of it can make money, and because he's a pompous, asshole, from what I heard. I don't know him personally, but from what I'm hearing, he just basically, do what he want to do, and so he went along with it. That's why you got all of the stuff thing. So it wasn't even to me it wasn't even about the whole, Black Helen of Troy thing. Like, we know the original Peloponnesians and all of them was melanated, so that's not even it for me. It's just the fact that the overall story, the way that they did it, was just horrible, because it was really about destroying the idea of the hero, and it was also maladapted through the lens of a feminist who wrote a version of the Iliad in which it basically was all about how women were treated in it, when the original joint was about how societies come to ruin based upon the idiosyncrasies of corrupt men. The main character, Odysseus, who, in when you read the Odyssey, you see that Odysseus is somewhat clever. You know what I'm saying? He's not he's kind of like Loki without being or Thor without being extra verbose. You know what I'm saying? But they had the characterization of him in the movie, just had him looking like a nigga who just suffered all types of, like a crazy veteran. Like, that's how they played it. Like, the PTSD was just too much for this nigga, and he just, you know what I mean, really couldn't deal with it. And like I said, Elliot Page, they positioned that character Synod in a way where almost the whole thing was almost low key based on him, all because they want to still promote this idea that transgenderism still matters to people, and that's a big thing. And what better way is to use this mentally ill person as a means to show that it's a man. You see what I'm saying? But they sacrifice him as soon as the movie start. You know what I mean? um Lupita Nyong'o, you know what I mean? And then they had all of the superheroes in it. They had Chani MJ in it. They had the Punisher in it. Had Spider-Man in it. Had Batman in it. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, it just really wasn't good. It just really wasn't a good film. The score was all off. It was just horrible. But the overall idea of the story, which is the basis of what hero, or what we'll call superhero type movies are, was the idea of the hero having regret on how it came into being, and how basically the whole war was fought by men based upon their hubris and pride, and how basically all of them were fools in a way. You know what I mean? You missed all of you don't see any of that in this. It's just a bunch of cut scenes and a bunch of instances that really destroy the idea of what a hero is. And that's what these movies are there to do, to distract and discourage and make men all seem corrupt and unredeemable. You understand? When that's not the era that our generation grew up in. You know what I mean? Our generation grew up listening to stories and watching stories of heroes, whether make made believe or in real life. They needed to destroy. They are always looking to destroy the male idea of heroism, and always want to put it in the context that women are somehow more heroic than men. Always a juxtaposition. You see what I'm saying? They're always trying to put you in a juxtaposition of that. And because women are susceptible to flattery, they will fall into that, and go along with it, so long as they are propelled to the top of whatever the status quo, or whatever the attention grabbing of the event is. That's why when you look at the movie, all of the gods are immaterial, but all of the female gods are seen as people. You understand what I'm saying? So, other than a few instances, was cool, but for the most part, it just really wasn't good. However, it is a to me, in looking back on it, it basically was the Dark Knight Rises. He basically made the Dark Knight Rises just with the Odyssey. You know what I mean? It was the same type of contrite, put together story that most people will accept because it's coming from Nolan, but it's not in the long term. It made all of the other epics I grew up watching way better. Like watching this, Gladiator looked Oscar worthy. You understand what I'm saying? Troy looked like crazy. Ben-Hur, all that shit they was making a couple of years ago, that shit is way better. This movie make that shit look like the best movies in the world. You know what I mean? So even Gods of Egypt was better than this shit. Like, you know what I mean? So Clash, exactly. The original Clash of the Titans would eat this thing all the way up. However, like I said, Hollywood got a band behind this because this is their last ditch effort to show the investors that there's still some life left in this agenda based. We want to turn everybody into trans, make men hate themselves, and put women to be at the front of everything. Like this is the last death throes of that culture. Because after this, it's pretty much over. You know what I'm saying? Most of the IPs that you grew up watching as a child, all of that shit is about to go public in the next 5 to 10 years. So Hollywood really is not going to exist the way that it exists now, if it ever will. That's why they're trying to do this whole thing now to go against physical media. They're trying to dead DVDs and video games where you gotta just buy it and there's a piece of paper in it and all that. So that ain't gonna happen because as soon as they announced that, I saw a whole thread where they got the new DVDs where you could just burn the games now. Where you could go through your whole PS5 list, burn all your games on DVD, and then you good. So that's going to create a whole nother market that's going to make more money than the digital market that they're trying to go on to. So what we're also talking about is an underlying thing. There's an underlying revolution against AI technology taking over. That's what all of this, the undergirdling that they're not talking about is happening, and it's freaking them out. You know what I'm saying? It's really freaking them out, which is a good thing. So the Odyssey also is an allegory to what's happening to Trump, because in this instance, Trump is Odysseus. You know what I'm saying? Actually, he might be Agamemnon. Um, and what's happening is that he was recently, when he went to China, got put into a quagmire. There's a thing in political science called, excuse me, there's a thing in political science called a Thucydides Trap. Has anybody ever heard of this? Anybody went to college, anything like that? You ever heard of the Thucydides Trap? Thucydides Trap? Okay. So this is a thing where you get put into a position to have to answer something. Matter of fact, let me just pull it up. Okay. This was Agamemnon, who basically what you see him doing here is what you see him doing in the movie. He's basically just standing. This is Batman. You know what I'm saying? He basically just took Batman costume and then made it Agamemnon. You know what I mean? And it looked good. Like there were certain scenes in it that were good. Like when he went to hell, that was cool. The Cyclops scene with the giant Nephilim, Apollyon and shit in the cave with the sheep, that could have been cool. But they didn't. But they messed it up with the whole nobody part. That didn't work. Um, what else was cool? The scene with Cersei was turning the niggas into pigs. That could have been better. I mean, it was cool, but it could have been better. But they turned Cersei, instead of turning her into a nymphomaniac, they turned her into a post rape victim. You know what I mean? Who's been basically blaming men for everything that happened wrong in the world. Like it just was just stupid. You could tell this was all through through the feminist chick. that they was doing, because all men in Hollywood for the most part are all cuckolds or gay or beta males for the most part. But getting back to Thucydides. The Thucydides Trap is a political theory stating that when a rapidly rising power threatens to displace an established ruling power, the resulting structural stress makes war the likeliest outcome. Coined by the Harvard scholar Graham Allison, the concept draws from the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, who observed that the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens was driven by Sparta's fear of Athens' growing power. So the core aspect of that, the mechanics, is the challenger grows more confident and demanding, and the incumbent power becomes anxious, defensive, increasingly willing to use preemptive force to maintain its dominance. Who does that sound like? What does that sound like? That's exactly what's happening with the Iran. Exactly. With the Iran war, right? Exactly. Now, in this case, this nigga Donnie was standing in front of Xi Jinping, and then Xi Jinping basically made a joke like, well, being that, United States is in decline, you know what I mean? You guys are going to have to figure out what you're going to do, because you're not going to be in a position for that point. Now, at that point, when he said that, Donald, right? Donald was supposed to say that no, our country is not in decline. Matter of fact, it's doing better than ever, right? That's what he was supposed to say and do, but he didn't do that. What this egomaniac did was say, yeah, well, there are elements that are in decline, but then we're also growing. So what he did in that moment was validate, right? He validated the rapidly rising power that threatens to displace the established ruling power. In that case, that is China. See what I'm saying? So in that, once he agreed with his enemy, his rival, that now gave Xi Jinping and the Chinese high command, Central Intelligence, the idea that whatever their plans with Taiwan are going to be, it's now a go. It's a go, because they're not going to be able to funnel a war on two fronts. Yes, he fell into the Thucydides trap, which again is symbolic, because this happened right when the Odyssey came out. You understand? So I'm showing you the correlation and how they use these movies as a means to go along with the script. So in this case, he might be both. He might be Agamemnon, who sacrificed his daughter. In the story, Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter so that way he can get a proper wind to be able to speedily get the ships all the way to Troy so they could mount the invasion sooner than later. So he literally sacrifices his daughter to do that. So even though Agamemnon is a tragedy as well, because what he represents is the idea that regardless to what happens or who has to die, it is the king's right to secure victory regardless to how much blood is spared, because anybody who dies in the name of what the king wants, right, is justified because of the fact that the king has the divine right to rule. That's what Agamemnon represents. That's why in the story, after he takes Troy, he winds up ruling, but at the same time, he winds up getting killed by the twin sister of Helen. She winds up killing the nigga. You see what I'm saying? Yes, Jelani, China smell blood. Exactly. Whereas Odysseus represents somebody who's cunning and secure and all of that, but is still haunted for the fact that he had to break the divine law, right? Which is, when somebody gives you a gift, you're supposed to do that. Somebody comes in peace, you're supposed to give them that peace. He broke that by creating the Trojan horse. You see what I'm saying? Because it was a gift. And back then, gifts were seen as blessings from the gods. You see what I'm saying? So when you take the blessings of the gods and turn it into something that is then used to then pervert the blessing to get what you want, you get cursed. You understand? So this is why him falling into the Thucydides trap, he's now established himself as the loser as well as the United States, because now Xi Jinping know that this nigga's time is not only up, but the United States hegemony that they had over the world has now fractured. Look at what's happening in the Middle East. You got to understand, all of those Middle East countries are fake countries. Those countries were ceded over to the United States at the close of the British Empire's rule, right? Because remember, all of those countries were under the Ottoman Empire. They were under the old Moorish Ottoman Empire. So they weren't countries to begin with. The people who turned them into countries, they themselves were a bunch of basic savages, for lack of a better word. They was out here murdering each other for sheep and all of that until they found out the oil thing was there. And then that's what they decided to do. They turned their oil situation into a means for them to then create a homogeny over their own people, in which they would modernize themselves by becoming capitulate countries where they could use their oil to negotiate and move themselves up in the modern era, while at the same time adopting a fake form of Islam called Wahhabism that allowed them to continuously kill and rape and murder their own peoples. You understand? So these countries that you see today, Bahrain and Qatar and Dubai, and these are all fake countries. Those countries are there to facilitate military bases for the United States. They're all extensions of the United States that got them once Britain alley-ooped them and made the United States the power. But Britain only did that because they knew that they had already set up the small hat state as a bottleneck that they would be able to utilize and semi-control the United States through. You understand? So now that these countries is being bombed into oblivion, they're not going to be able to sustain themselves as individuals, because what's the use of having all of that money in oil and you can't get none of that oil out? It's over. So Xi Jinping is looking at this like, oh, this is how it needs to go, because now we have the basic control. So all they have to do is what they're doing: keep supplying Iran with arms, keep supplying Iran, and pretty soon the United States is pretty much done. Which by the time that the United States understand, okay, this is what it is. Now, if they move on Taiwan, how are they going to stop them? How are they really going to stop them? The Chinese is living in the future. You know what I'm saying? Now, this is not to say that China is better. I'm not even saying that. It's not better as a country. It's just more efficient. You understand? But the means of control is still there. You understand? They're communists still. Don't get it twisted. They want to control everything. You can't own nothing. You understand? That's not the American way. See what I'm saying? However, they have a better understanding of their technology than the United States do. Because the United States is still trying to be the number one superpower in the world, while at the same time constricting the value of its own people on behalf of another government. China don't have that problem. China wants elements of its population to flourish. They just can't allow them to flourish to the point where the people decide that they want to have all of their shit back. So they got to create. So the same way the United States creates bread and circus, they'll do that too, but they're doing it with technology. You understand? Modern relevance. Today, the theory is most frequently applied to the shifting dynamics between the United States, the ruling power, and China, the rising power. That's why they call China and Japan the land of the rising sun, right? The concept has been entered into high-level geopolitics as Chinese President Xi Jinping specifically referencing the trap during meetings with presidents, including Trump and Biden, to warn against the strategic miscalculations on flashpoints like Taiwan. See what I'm saying? So the framework of this international quagmire that these niggas is in has created this bottleneck situation by which this nigga is not going to be able to sustain anything, because by his own mouth he has already admitted that they don't have the that they are in a decline. Why are they in a decline? Because of the very actions of him and his government. You understand? That's why. So when you say and agree to that, you're agreeing to everything that goes along with that. So now this gives China the right to exploit that. That's why, if you notice, as soon as the nigga said that, right after that, he did a State of the Union address, right? And who did he say was the people who was meddling in the election? Who did he say was China? Exactly. But we know it wasn't China. They may have had elements to do with it, but for the most part, it wasn't them. Who was it? Really? Exactly. So when he say China, he's really talking about them. But did he put sanctions against China recently? Did a bill come up in which China was going to be merged with the United States military, or was it the other nations' bill that came up to be merged with them? And that didn't go through, did it? Exactly. So this may be an element of which he is trying to force these niggas into a battle of contrition, right? While at the same time trying to save face like they still cool by using China, right, as the deficit. Because in the same thing, he came out and said what? That the CIA and these niggas knew that the CIA and them knew that China allegedly was doing this and withheld all of that information from him and the government. Right? Didn't he say that? Exactly. Exactly. So that's not good, because there's one thing of having an aspect of plausible deniability with shit that you don't want people to know that you're involved with. That's one thing. But it's a whole nother thing when you are in a situation where members of your own government are not only hiding shit from you, they're manipulating the information that they're hiding from you. That's treason. That's sedition. But remember, CIA, they don't work for the United States people. They don't work for them. They, they don't work for them at all. They work for the foreign interests of the people who really put them in power to work. And that's everybody else. That's now when you get into the deep state, when you get into the military industrial complex, the small hats, the mafia. Because remember, there's different CIA within CIA. You got the Jewish CIA, you got the Christian CIA, you got the corporate CIA, you got the Satanist. You understand what I'm saying? You got all of these different elements within that one group, that each one has its own agenda working against or with the other one, setting each other up, killing each other. Like, you understand? All to keep the whole shell game going. That's the point. So you have committees within committees within committees, and none of these committees are actively working for the benefit of the country. They're working to steal and pull and extract as much out of it as possible without giving anything back to the people who are actually from here. You understand? So that's why all of this Greek tragedy shit is in news, is in the mainstream right now, because they're showing you this is what happened. This is how Troy fell. So look at Troy as the United States. See what I'm saying? Not America, but the United States. That's what Troy is right now. And it's being pulled apart by two liars. Agamemnon was a liar. Odysseus was a liar. See what I'm saying? Both of them. One ended up in hell. You know what I'm saying? The other wound up going back, but had to come back as a beggar. You understand? So you have what is, so we're only looking at the only outcome of this can be a Pyrrhic victory. Has anybody ever heard the term Pyrrhic victory before? For those people that used to have Western sociology classes and stuff like that, they would talk to you about Pyrrhic. Anybody ever heard what a Pyrrhic victory is? What Pyrrhic victory is? It doesn't matter. I'm gonna tell you. I'm just asking. Okay. Have you ever heard of Sisyphus? Because these are all examples of what I'm saying. Okay. So, for people that don't know, Sisyphus was the guy who was constantly having to push everything uphill. He basically was a mortal version of Prometheus. Prometheus, on the other hand, son of the god, taught man how to use fire, and because of that, he was then cursed, right, by having his guts eaten up during the day, and then at night it all grows back, and then the next day he have his guts ripped out by the vultures. The vulture god in old Egyptian mythology is Nekhebet, right? That's the vulture god. He's similar to Khepra, who is the dung beetle, right? Yeah, the vulture can be the phoenix, but Nekhebet doesn't turn to ash. Like, Nekhebet stays in its primordial form as the vulture. It feeds on the carrion, whereas the phoenix, in a sense, becomes the carrion to then turn itself back into its original state. You know what I'm saying? So one is more about resurrection, and the other one is more about redemption. You know what I mean? So with the Pyrrhic victory, a Pyrrhic victory is a win that comes at such a massive, devastating cost that it is functionally equivalent to a defeat. You understand? The concept applies to situations where the losses suffered by the winner outweigh the actual benefits of the triumph, leaving them worse off in the long run. What does that sound like? That sound like the Iran war, right? That's what's happening in Iran right now, right? We also have to understand that the Iranians are essentially Persians. They are not Arabs. Remember, the ruling the ruling black nobility, the ones we don't see, the Aldombrani and the Breakspear and the Chigi and the all of those papal bloodlines we be talking about, all of them niggas is Persians. You understand? So look at this. So now look at what's happening from that position. The nigga who pays for all, the Grand Sultan of all of Islam, the so-called Wahhabi version of Islam, that nigga's a Persian. Excuse me. He's really Persian. Right. So you're dealing with Persian deities like Zoroaster and Ahriman and Ahura Mazda, right? Fighting um the Israeli gods, who is who? Baal and Moloch, right? And Yahweh, right? That's who they're fighting. Then the United States, right? They're now all a mixture of people who venerate both. Now their God is like, the more modern versions of these gods, like Baphomet or um Lucifer, or what you'll call Satan. You understand what I'm saying? This is who these niggas gods are, right? Whereas Britain, the Britons, their shit is more old Germanic. Cause remember, the British royal family is all Germans. So now you're talking about they're dealing with shit like the Wittenagemot, Wotan. You see what I'm saying? Loki, Yggdrasil. So these are the gods that are behind these niggas fighting with one another. You understand? So that's why it's not going nowhere fast, because they can't really do it. So you're also trying to see an uprooting, an unseating of this old perpetual Persian so-called black Moorish nobility that has been, whitewashed through the years, that has now occupied itself under the cover of a Shia, right? A Shia, right? Under a Shia type of veil. That's why there's always been that beef between the Sunnis and the Shias, which is why the United States is trying to arm niggas like the Kurds, right? Because the Kurds are dealing with one of the older gods that was equivalent to Zoroaster, Ahura Mazda, and all of that, in the form of Malik Tos, the peacock king. You see what I'm saying? So above all of these warring factions, you got these unseen gods that is working through these niggas, and everybody's trying to unseat the so-called black papal nobility that itself is then being run low-key and financed through the Vatican. Because remember, all of these papal bloodlines under the black, white, and gray pope, all of them niggas served the Persians. You understand? They're all serving Persian gods and Persian so-called black nobility that seeded into the old Moorish bloodlines. You see what I'm saying? And created their way to be able to build up all of those old gods once ancient Persia came through the ancient world and rebuilt everybody's temple. Remember, it was Xerxes, right? Who invaded Sparta and all of that at Thermopylae and all this shit. So you see how it's always coming back to some Peloponnesian Greek shit. The phrase originates from the history of King Pyrrhus of Epirus, right? His army in 280-279 BCE. His army fought the Roman Republic in southern Italy. See? Moors, fighting Moors. While Pyrrhus won two initial battles at Heraclea and Asculum, his army suffered staggering casualties, losing most of his top commanders and elite troops. What's happening in Iran right now? Them niggas losing. They're losing because they're using up all of their munitions. They don't have enough munitions to keep the shit going. Even if they was to try to flip the draft, which if they do, that's when the whole thing gonna collapse. Because nobody in America is trying to go. Right now in the United States military, they're revolting in the military. The soldiers is like, nah, we're not fighting for AI Satan Yahoo. We're not doing that for Mr. Milikowski. We're not gonna go die for this nigga. So send somebody else. This nigga Hegseth, right? He's gonna be not only impeached, this nigga's gonna go down for war crimes. Because he's the one who came out and said we're not gonna follow our own war manual. This nigga. He's the one with the double crosses on his chest. The same Saint James cross that you see on Jigga's Douce bottles. Anybody that's selling you a product with a double cross on it is there to double cross you. You understand what I'm saying? It's a double cross. The double cross is the sign of the Templars. The Templars was wiped out. When they tell you all of these stories about the Templars that were able to escape and set up that, yeah, there might have been some of them, but not enough. The ones who took over those names. Remember, they just adopt the names to keep the whole shit going. But the Templars that set out in the initial Crusades are not the ones who by the end of the Crusades have set up the banks. They were not the same people. No Freemasons built pyramids or temples. You understand? King Hiram was not a Freemason. Freemasonry did not exist at the time that King Hiram, the nigga that y'all doing all of these rituals to represent, y'all killing him, right? In the Enter the Apprentice degree, you are following a ritual in which you're celebrating and acting as one of the people who helped kill this nigga. You're him. They're making you him. And then swearing you to uphold the secret for them about the murder that you have just reenacted you becoming a part of. None of them niggas was Freemasons. They tell you they were ruffians. What is a ruffian? A hoodlum, right? A criminal, right? 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 And then if you reveal any of the secrets, they then do to him what they did to you. Do to you what they did to him. And these are the people you call your brothers. You see how sick the whole shit is? It's sick. You gotta be sick to be with that shit. In my humble opinion. You understand? You can't be like, oh, I don't agree with church or I'm not into religion or whatever, but then you into that. You can't be that. Then they say, oh, well, that whole thing is there to help you. It embraces whatever so-called religion you in. That's right, because they don't care. Because they see all of it as a means to an end. The religion is keeping the secret and doing the ritual. That's what you're doing. So they don't care if you're a Christian. They don't care if you're a Muslim. They don't care if you're an atheist. They don't care about none of that. Because they don't believe in none of that, no way. They only believe in turning you into a version of God. But to do that, you have to negate your humanity. You understand? So it becomes a Pyrrhic victory. Because what you lose in the process is way more than what you ever gain. Winning a battle, but losing so many soldiers and resources that the army can no longer defend itself. And that's what China's going to do. They're going to do what the United States did to Russia during the Afghanistan war when Russia invaded Afghanistan. They just sent RPGs They just kept sending RPGs. These niggas, these soldiers couldn't fight the tanks. The Afghans couldn't fight the tanks and all that type of shit. They couldn't stop the kamikaze helicopters that the Russians and them had. So what did they do? They needed something to. They needed a weapon that they could reduce casualties through and could help them deal with the air cavalry that Russia had. So they gave them SAMs. They gave them surface to air missiles, and those surface to air missiles, they shot down so many of them niggas. They shot down so many of them helicopters that all Russia wound up doing was funneling more money and more money and more money and more money to the point where it bankrupted the country. It bankrupted them. So they could not afford to fight anymore, so they had to leave. But that is the history of Afghanistan. Nobody in that region was able to ever conquer it thoroughly because of how the region and the way the ley lines in that region intersect. It's not conducive for that. So it's now the same thing with Iran. Iran is circled by a crown, a literal crown of mountains. There's no way in. You understand? There's no way in. There's no way in. So it's over for the most part. It's a wrap for them. They're not going to be able to really get it off how they want. But China is going to do, like I said, what Russia did. They're going to keep giving them money. They're going to keep giving them more weapons, more munitions, better munitions, which is going to give them more subsidies by the Iranian government to bypass a lot of the fees that they charge everybody else to get their oil through. You see what I'm saying? And all that's going to do is embolden them even more. That's why you hear these niggas in small hat land trying to now talk shit about China. Right after this, niggas talking shit about China. Why? Because they know China poised to deal with Taiwan. Even though, to me, that don't even make sense. Because China is one of the biggest trading partners with Taiwan. China's issue with Taiwan is the fact that the nationals of Taiwan was able to still establish themselves outside of the communist takeover. You understand? That's really what the problem is with them. Because the fact that Taiwan still exists shows that the real Republic of China is really Taiwan. So they still have their original nationality. You dig? That's the problem with them. The underlying problem with them. But outside of that, they be making money with them. They also don't like that all the transceivers and the transistors and shit and the microchips and shit that Taiwan produce, they don't like that they got a first right refusal with the United States. But with the United States caught up in Iran, they don't have enough people and enough manpower to deal with what's happening with this nigga. What's happening if they decide to go to Taiwan and move. How they gonna do that? Then remember, these niggas is still in Ukraine. They still gotta send Ukraine money. So you see what they've done? They boxed themselves in. They can't do it. So if you didn't know, a gang is the ones that's in charge of the intelligence as it goes. Remember I told you that Tulsi Gabbard, she had to move, they had to get her out of there because it came out openly that her handler is a Hindu nigga because she's actually Hindu. She actually Indian. Remember, your whole government is being run by people who are not from this country. That's the other problem. The corrupt the corrupt Supreme Court blocked them from setting it up where you don't have to be an American. They still have not made it cement that you have to be an American to run the government. Because they went through the women. They went through the DNC women. to keep this provision open. One of these, one of these idiots, Ketanji Brown, this chick who married to a white man, she couldn't even tell you what a woman was. This how sick in the mind this bitch is. She can't even. They asked her, well, what is a woman? She couldn't give an example of what a woman is, and she is one. So you see how they can just implant these idiots. This is why all of the stupider you are in government, the higher up you go. Anthony Hopkins said, actors by nature are stupid people. He said they're stupid. He said, and myself included. So they shouldn't have any opinion about anything other than acting. This is why they made an actor the president, i.e., Ronald Reagan. You see what I'm saying? So the government in the intelligence side is run by a literal gang. They call them the Gang of Eight. Is a colloquial term referring to a group of 8 key leaders in the U.S. Congress who are briefed on highly classified intelligence matters and sensitive national security operations by the executive branch. By law, the president is required to keep intelligence committees fully informed, but in extraordinary circumstances, briefings can be restricted to just these 8 members. So the 8, because this is Saturn, remember, and this is also infinity on the vertical, remember, the Speaker of the House Minority Leader, the Senator Minority Leader, the Senate Majority Leader, the Chair and Ranking Member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Chair and Vice Chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence. These are the 8 people who are in charge of keeping all of the information and intelligence away from the whoever is sitting as president. And because of how the law is written, none of these niggas have to actually be born here to get this job. All they got to do is be elected. Just like after your man Lindsey Graham died, they just swore in his sister. Think about this. A sitting member of Congress died, and without a vote, without any type of inquiry from the public, they went and swore in this person's sister. Name a job that you could get in the real world, right? Where when you die or you might be sick, your brother can just automatically come and get the job. Have you ever heard of that? Have you ever heard of anything like that? That's treason. To me, that's treason. At best, it's sedition. At best, it's sedition, at least. How does that even work? How do you put somebody in position of power based upon who they related to, and then still call this place and call this thing a so-called democracy? I mean, it's not a democracy, it's a republic. But it's a republic that's functioning through a democracy based upon the insurgency that took over the country after your man Lincoln waged a war, right? That put everybody under the same jurisdiction through the 13th and the 14th Amendment, which then opened the door up for the foreigners through the British Accreditation Registry to come and take over the government. This is how it happened. But then peep this. Hold on. At the same time, the government's still being run by pedophiles. Speaking of pedophiles, at the latest party, at the latest white party with Michael Rubin, your boy Ep was there. Your boy, what's his name? Palm Beach Pete. This nigga was out there too, who just got denied because of his DNA results that the Florida government is sitting on and won't let nobody see, because again, it's going to come out that it's this nigga who is now under a whole new name, or a clone, or a twin, or a brother, or whatever he is to this nigga, but he's still in play. So he's there partying with Jay-Z, partying with everybody, right? Khaled and Tiana and everybody is partying with this nigga still. King Darius. They found a body on a property owned by the Congresswoman Presley. The ballhead chick? they they found a body on a ballhead chick property? The crazy looking one. Presley is her name, right? They found a body on her property. Yo, son, this shit is wow. Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. But they just passed a bill that says that anybody who is caught up in any type of sexual or criminal charge, and they use the congressional money to pay for it, you now can search all of that up online. So that ain't going to be good for them. Look at this. So remember what I just told you about the Gang of Eight. But look. Yes, the CIA occasionally withholds certain high sensitive operational details, such as the identities of confidential human sources, specific ongoing tactical operations, from the president. However, this is done to protect the integrity of the sources, right? With the legal oversight frameworks, rather than to defy the president. So you're defying the president. This is what you're doing. Because the president sits at the very top of the executive branch, they are legally entitled to view virtually any classified document unilaterally, declassifying information. Despite this ultimate authority, the intelligence community may selectively brief the White House on a need-to-know basis. So who is really in control? Who is in control? How is he the head of everything, can declassify everything, but how can you declassify shit you don't know about? Does that make sense? Do you see why the whole thing is going to collapse in on itself? Because they're all lying. There are like 1,000 juntas inside of one government. They being paid off by the small hats. They being bribed by the small hats, by China, by Russia, by Ukraine, by Mexico. They're being bribed by everybody. That's why they can't afford nobody that's American born to really be in the government anymore. Yeah, there's 33 levels above the president. Exactly, Brock. There's one giant junta government, and everybody is using it to do whatever they want to do in it. Look at what this nigga Mandami doing in New York. Look at California. Look at what they doing in Virginia right now. Supreme Court say that none of you niggas can do anything to stop people from owning guns. They still coming up with laws against owning guns. The Supreme Court came out, said the Chevron deference shut down any agency that is not specifically a part of the original Constitution and the original constitutional agencies. What are they doing? Violating all of that and still moving forward with shit. Why? Because the people are not standing up, but they're starting to. Because the people don't understand how the government works. The Constitution is not about your rights. The Constitution is there to restrict the rights of the government. Constitution has nothing to do with us. It is our document to stop them from doing everything that they've been doing since 1791. But the government is run by occult agencies who we can use a term universally, umbrella term, satanic. But really by satanic, we're talking about evil. They're not just sacrificing babies to Moloch or Baal. The Sackler family, who is responsible for trying to own all the water in California, as well as the opioid epidemic, they get the chemical from a Mormon family in Jersey. You understand what I'm saying? All of these niggas at some point are overlapping, working together, marrying into each other's family against the rest of us. And we out here set tripping on whose knowledge is better, whose profit is more real, and all of this shit when all these niggas was being funded by the same people. The fake American Party started through a group called the Native American Party. Another name for the Native American Party was the American Party. Then they changed it to the American Republican Party, also referred to the Whig Party. But this Republican Party is not the original Republicans like us. These are usurpers. These are fake Republicans. These are foreigners. Let me show you. They were a part. I did a whole video on these niggas one time. It's still in the search. I forget the name of the video, but I went through this a couple of times. I'm gonna go through it again so you guys can see what I'm saying. They were and are a secret Masonic group built up of many different so-called Freemasons. They are a part or were a part of a group called the Know Nothings, because when they would be caught doing political subversion, doing political hits, killing people, burning up villages, burning up cities, and they were asked what they were trying to find out the information on them, they always say, "We know nothing." So they became known as the Know Nothings. The Know Nothings were also referred to as the Nativists or the Native American Party. The Native American Party was a political movement in the United States when in the 1850s, when they were bringing all of them over here on the boats to help destabilize what little power we still had left. And they dumped them all in old Amsterdam, right, which is New York. And afterwards, simply the American Party. The members of the movement were required to say, "I know nothing," whenever they were asked about its specifics by outsiders, providing the group with its colloquial name. This also goes back to the Odyssey with Odysseus. In the scene or in the story, right, when they go into the cave, they're looking for provisions. They see these sheep, right? The sheeps are coming out of this cave. So they follow the sheeps back into the cave, but the cave inside the herder of the sheeps was a giant, a Nephilim, who happened to be a Cyclops, who was the son of Poseidon. So this was Apollo, I believe, or Apollyon or whatever. And so while inside the cave, he don't allow them to leave. So he eats some of Odysseus's men. So they get trapped in the cave for a little while until Odysseus figures out a way to get them out. So they get some of the men to put like shrubs on the back of their backs. And when the sheep go out in the morning, they crawl on all fours to do that. But there's another section in it where he asks where Odysseus now is trying to talk the Cyclops into letting them go because he wants to get them drunk. Once he gets them drunk, then he stabs them in the eye and they go. But when he stabs, but he doesn't want to incur the wrath of his father, the giant's father, who was Poseidon. Because remember, they still on the ships trying to sail home. So he tells the giant that his name is nobody, right? So that way, when he stabs him in the eye and then he gets him drunk, and when Poseidon, he screams out to Poseidon, and Poseidon's like, well, who did this to you, my son? See? He says, nobody. You understand? So this, again, is drawing more attention, bringing us back to the whole Greek shit and why these niggas refer to themselves as the know-nothings, i.e. the nobodies. You understand? Yes, exactly, Truth. I was going to say that. And remember, the head of the Ku Klux Klan is called the Grand Cyclops. Exactly. 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 So you see how it all goes back and always around in a circle, right? So the party was set up by this nigga right here, the first Native American, a small hat named Charles Levin. And what they started to do was recruit other nationalities to come in, and they referred to themselves as Native Americans, right? Because they were here to replace the original autochthon so-called Americans, of which they were now going to adopt. And so what they did was they ran all the original men and women who were still Moors out of Tammany Hall, which was named after the patron saint of America, i.e. Chief Tammany, the Moor. Okay? And so once they came into that, they decided that it would be good for them to further adopt so-called American, Native American values. And so they started to set themselves up in different parts of the country, especially those where there still were melanated people who had their own so-called American Indian tribes. And they found their way to blackmail themselves or put themselves into these tribes and then get rid of the original people who were the original founders and members of those so-called tribes, i.e. broken so-called Indian, what we would today call American Indian, which means, again, what? Moorish, which is Moorish American, because them niggas decided that they were going to go along with the United States designation instead of going along with who and what they were, right? This is why you have all of these so-called fake American Indians and all of that to this day, who are in these tribes today, and why they all look white, because they are descended from these people who came in and adopted and took over. Again, this whole thing was started by a small hat. We see this in the movie Gangs in New York, which I did a whole video on that. I showed you even in that movie, when you go into Tammany Hall, they had the pictures of all the dark-skinned Moors in regalia on the wall. They even had the fez with the red, white, and blue tassels and all of that on the wall, because they had to leave everything the way that it was so that way they can still act like they had some sort of connection to it. The other thing is that they were anti-Catholics. You know who was a know-nothing? John Wilkes Booth. He was a part of the Know Nothings. Yep, look it up. The Native American Party experienced a rapid surge in popularity following the collapse of the Whig Party in the 1850s. See, right before the war. As its peak, the party boasted control over what? The several state legislatures. What do we say about the several states? Those were all of the states that the Moors still had their primary positions in, and elected 8 governors. In 1854, the party swept Massachusetts, capturing the governor's office. See the word? Capturing the government's office. The governor's office and almost the entire state legislature. That's what they do. This was the first major insurgency in the 1800s that led to the ultimate junta by 1871, when they consolidated all of this. It was the Know Nothings that again helped establish the Ku Klux Klan, which came out of what? The Democratic Party. This is the Democratic Party. They had the name of the Democrats and the Republicans. So look, this one junta called itself the American Party, the American Republican Party, the Native American Party, the Democratic National Party. It's all the same people. That's why they only look out for foreigners and nobody that's from here, because they are following the same jurisdictional bullshit that their forefathers was doing. That's why they look for people who fresh off the boat that they can get, clean up, give them some English classes and put them right into government. That's how they do it. They don't care if you're African, if you're Haitian, if you're Cuban, it doesn't matter. So long as you're not from here. That's what you have to understand. So long as you're not from here, you're good, because they can control you. Because you are more ankin to follow behind somebody else that's an immigrant. Why you think everything out of this nigga Mandami mouth is about how great it is to be an immigrant and how immigrants built this country? No, the immigrants sacrificed the country. The immigrants captured the country. While you keep looking at white people, while you keep blaming so-called white people for what it is you think they doing, these are the niggas that's running it. They are the ones doing the work. They are working with the white people. It don't matter what color they are in the end, because they'll go with whatever, so long as they can take what your benefits are. Because you being born here is a threat to them. Because what is here is really here for you. They are living off of your birthright, like they always do. In April in 1981, there was a whole ship of 10 what you'll call white supremacists, and it was 3 undercover agents from different U.S. law enforcement agencies. They were stopped in New Orleans because they were sailing to the Dominican Republic, and what they planned to do was overthrow the whole government of the Dominican Republic. You know who was one of the orchestrators of the plan? This nigga David Duke, allegedly. You know who else was allegedly down with the shit? Ron Paul. Real talk. You can look this up. They're all down with it. They don't have any allegiance, even to the thing that they have allegiance to. It's all about moving everybody who was from the original place out, creating juntas, and then overthrowing one junta for the next. So it's always a shell game. It's always some sort of unrest because that's the only way that they can govern. They cannot govern everything if everything is going good and everybody is happy. They have to keep everything at a perpetual state of imbalance. They all work together. The Mormons is working with they're all Freemasons. That's the glue that's binding all of these niggas together. This is the political science that we were supposed to get in school that was denied us because they took the school system and infiltrated it with a bunch of social workers who were socialists, who were communists, who were there to teach us communism in the form of what they call black liberation. President Trump delivered a primetime address last night where he repeated claims that the country's voting systems are vulnerable to being rigged and stolen. The president presented no new evidence of a single fraudulent vote in any election. He said he was declassifying the intelligence documents to reveal shocking vulnerabilities of our election infrastructure. This is also that way when they get killed in the midterms, he can deny the results of the midterms, so he can basically create a perpetual state of emergency, which again goes against the actual Constitution. Because to have a state of emergency, you have to have also a state of war or some sort of nationwide calamity that is affecting everybody at the nation at one point, at one time. And there is none. Trump versus Slaughter. The court today takes a notable step back toward the Constitution by recognizing that the president is entitled to remove a principal officer who exercises executive power in his name. The court does much to vindicate Frank Delano Roosevelt and James Madison both understood under our Constitution. Executive power does not belong to a headless fourth branch. Roosevelt Committee in 1930 and 36 must be exercised through the chain of dependence, running from the lowest officers to the president and from him to the American people. At the same time, it would be a great mistake to think that that step is enough on its own. The fact remains that the Congress has endowed formerly independent agencies, not just the executive authority, but with enormous legislative and judicial powers as well. And now the president enjoys full control over those powers too. From here, only sure path to finish the journey we start today to restore the legislative and judicial powers to where they belong. In Congress and the courts, we have tolerated adventurous theories long enough. It is time to return all the way to the Constitution, which again binds the government from overstepping its boundaries. The collapse and legacy. Despite its explosive growth, the party collapsed almost as quickly as it rose. Deep internal divisions over the issue of slavery, specifically whether to expand it into a new Western territories, shattered the party. Northern know-nothings largely joined the newly formed Republican Party, while the Southern members aligned with the conservative opposition groups just prior to the Civil War. You see, we haven't been governed by actual Americans since 1791. And those Americans, according to George Washington, were under the jurisdiction of the Moorish Empire through the Sultan, who had ceded the lands back in the 1600s. in which all of the Moorish cities and things that were already here had switched over into the jurisdiction of those who were autochthonous to the land. So all of these old buildings with our faces and all of that stuff on it, that stuff been here for thousands of years, just changing one hand to the next. That's why they have to break men. They have to turn men into other things. Because if men actually stand up and be men, all of this shit gets shut down. All of this female, let's raise the matriarchy, all of this type of stuff, like that's really cool in theory. However, you cannot show me one consistent society from ancient time all the way to now, other than you telling me about Hatshepsut, or you telling me about maybe Queen Kahina, maybe Nzinga, Cleopatra. Outside of that, it's a Rizzy. You don't have any actual proof and validation of that fact. So what you do is you get a bunch of so-called Freemasons coming up with jargon and documents to try to tell you that you are something that you are not. That you are basically, as a man, you are not a man. You're just a degenerate female. All of that comes from old Freemasonic thoughts, right? That were created to, again, eliminate men, real men, from the equation and effeminate them. So that way, when they pop they prostates, they feel like they still can be men. You understand? Niggas like Hilton Hotima. One of my Moors sent me this on Facebook. Big up to them. Big up to everybody that send me stuff that I'm able to use to illustrate what I'm talking about. This is from the book The Secret of Regeneration by Hilton Hotima. Some of his stuff was cool, but a lot of it was just shit like this. The evil habits. Therefore, man is an incomplete, undeveloped, degenerate female. According to the law, like begets like. The bisexual organism, under favorable conditions, produces its kind. The first imperfect, positive male cell, the first male organism as an entity separated from its bisexual ancestor. See this? Was an initial failure on part of the ancestor to produce its kind. Some scholars hold that this was due to a chemical deficiency in the metabolism of the physique of the ancestor. Now, what they're saying then, or what he's trying to say through this book, The Evolution of Sex by Geddes and Thompson, and the Determination of Sex by Professor Len Hosik of Budapest, is in fact insisted upon in constant reiteration and demonstration. That doesn't mean that it's true just because you keep saying it constantly and constantly reiterate it. It's bullshit. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny. How can we prove this? Why? Well, because let's read it again. The bisexual organism under favorable conditions produces its kind, which means that in order for this so-called bisexual organism, which he is trying to deduce is superior, has to, under a favorable condition, produce its kind. So that means what? In order for it to be supreme, it has to be in a certain position in order for it to happen. How then is it superior? If it needs a specific position in order for it to be alive, in order for it to procreate itself, it has to be in a specific type of position, which means it is not superior, because superior means that me as a man, I can have sex with any female on this planet, whether in a bed, whether in under a car, in a cave, on top of a rock, on top of a mountain, in a hotel, whatever, and produce a baby. I don't need any specific position to make the baby. But this nigga is saying that this superior being that is bisexual, in order for it to do it, it has to be under a specific favorable condition. Right there, it already says that it's fake, that it's not real. Then it says the first imperfect positive male cell. How can it be imperfect and positive? How can it be imperfect and positive? First of all, what makes it imperfect and possible? Well, because it's male. The first male organism as an entity separated from its biological bisexual ancestor and was an initial failure on part of such an ancestor to produce its kind. You see that? So that means then that the bisexual thing that you talk about was inferior because it could not produce its own kind outside of favorable positions. The superior aspect of that had to be the male because the male was able to produce without it. You see what I'm saying? Y'all understand what I'm just relaying to you, right? Because remember, this goes directly back to you because we are the original people. So by this, they're basically saying that because we came out as males, we came out degenerate. But if we were degenerate, how were we able to produce in without favorable positions, favorable conditions? How could that be? It would have to be the opposite. So in that, the male is superior because it is from the male that allowed everything to manifest. This is not to negate the female, but what they want to do is turn this female into some sort of parthenogenesis, to turn her into the type of species that can produce on its own. When you have never seen that happen in any mammalian species on two legs in your life. You and I, or anybody that is alive, has never seen that ever happen, which means then that it never did. Freemason gobbledygook. Lest that the knowledge be lost, however, it was concealed in allegories and myths, which were meaningless to the profane, but self-evident to those acquainted with the theory of personal redemption, which was the foundation of philosophical theology. Christianity itself may be cited as an example. The entire New Testament is in fact an ingeniously concealed exposition of the secret processes of human regeneration. The characters so long considered as historical men and women really are the personification of certain processes which take place in the human body when man begins the task of consciously liberating himself from the bondage of ignorance and death. And so, what had to happen was people had to take these allegorical stories and create real stories from them. You understand? So, because let's say Musa or Moses represents the higher self forming from the lower self, in order for it to be real, they needed to create a circumstance in real life where somebody is actually was that and had to act out this whole thing in real life. That's why you don't see any pyramids, any burial grounds of anybody in the Bible. Maybe outside of Yeshua. There's no burial ground for David. There's no burial ground for Samson. There's no burial ground for Moses. There's none of these. There's no burial ground for Muhammad. None of these. And we're here today arguing over all of this as if it was real. Because after a certain point, and when this became they brought the art became reality, they had to actually get people to actively live this shit out as if it was real. And who are the people who act out all of the ancient plays? in modern time. Who are those people? What do we call those people today? And why is everybody in positions of power a part of these people? Why are they all involved with these people? Why do they all join up with these people to continue these plays? So we don't have evidence of things like that, but we have evidence of shit like this. But ain't nobody trying to talk to us about this type of stuff. Exactly. These things are real. This thing on the left was in Central Park, what they used to call Seneca Village. This other one is in India. But they ain't talking to us about that. We ain't got no plays about that. All we get with that is movies, which are the moving versions of Freemasonic plays where everybody can go and watch. But it's all being manipulated by the same people. Yeah, so all of these Siberians that they put out there, and all of the white people that took over the so-called tribes and then set up their white Dawes roles and then redesignated everybody else as Negro, Black, and colored. And then those so-called Negro, Black, and colors who took those designations of still calling themselves Indians, they took their tribal names and made their tribal names their national names, and then try to have their national names represent them as a separate form of government, not understanding that under the Indian Rights Act, that once they did that, they gave up their own original position of what those names actually meant because they had no jurisdiction over how they were going to be used and how the United States government was going to basically wipe all of that out. And then that's what they did. And so the Native Americans became everybody else that wasn't native to the Americas. Just like the republics became everybody else that wasn't from the republic. Just like the American Party became about everybody else that wasn't really American. You understand what I'm saying? And so now they could apply that to every other region on the planet. They could go to other parts of the world and other parts of the planet and basically get rid of all the original people that was in there and basically say that they really weren't from there because they're not phenotypically what those people who are ruling there look like today. So they can have a white Black Panther and it'd be all good. You should be okay with that. If they'll make, you see what I'm saying? Like I said, the Helen of Troy being melanated thing, that wasn't nothing because all the original so-called Greeks was melanated. The Peloponnesians was melanated. They all really know this. That place that you call Greece, the people that are there who call themselves Greece today, most of them niggas is Turks. You know what I'm saying? They're all Turks or descended from Turks. The Ataturk, the dude that they brought in there to destroy the so-called original Ottoman or Turkish Empire, that nigga was Greek. He's the one that they brought in there, the know nothings and them, i.e., the young Turks, brought him in there to abolish them wearing the fez that they only had been wearing for about 40 to 50 years before that, because all of the fezzes that they got at the close of the Ottoman Empire came from Morocco. It's one of my Facebook friends, Matu Atter. According to Homer and his Odyssey, Memnon was an Ethiopian and the cousin of the king of Troy, which made the king of Troy melanated. At one point, the Ethiopian troops went in to defend Troy against its enemies. Thus, the role of Nepeta Nyong'o as Helen of Troy would be in keeping with the writings of Homer. You see Memnon in the Greek art show. The statue is by a friend, an amazing new. Exactly. King Cephas, who is an actual constellation in the stars. Look up the King Cephas constellation. He's called the Great Ethiopian King. He represents the rising of the original people back to their position. Everybody was melanated, and that's what they don't like. The whole world. Go back and read that story that what's his name wrote. What's this nigga name? Benjamin Franklin wrote. He basically said the whole world was swarthy. The whole everybody except them. They all was melanated. But all of that changed. So that way they could move all of these niggas in. And then when we ask, well, how did it get this way? Who's to blame? Nobody. See what I'm saying? The know nothings. Exactly. Because that's what they do. What they've always done. Move people into your position, knock you out of your position, and then when you try to retake your position, they say it was never your position. Plausible deniability. That's how they are able to work. Yeah, so that's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with all of the Persians, the black nobility at war with itself, trying to move all of these other niggas out so that way they can rule for another 1,000 years under another lie. But nobody who is where they at is actually where they from, especially if they're Caucasian. Because all of them is impersonating everybody else. Just because they've been there for the past 20, 50, 80 years don't mean that they really from there. We're the only people that are really from where we're at. And that's a fact. That's why they say we're non-descendable. Because everybody, how can we be descended from everybody when everybody is actually descended from us? Think about that. That's why you can't be African, because African is a designation of a place, not a people. You understand? So those who decided to be Indians and decided to be all these other things, they put themselves in the position that they're in now because they went against what their ancestors were, and they're still doing it today. They're still coming up with reasons why they shouldn't be who and what they know that they are, and want to still blame one side of their ancestry for something when the majority of their ancestry was fighting against the shit. It's fighting against the very designation that we're in today. That's why there's certain Moors that are so adamant when it comes to being called Negro, black, colored, and everything else. Because of this fact. So that's why these so-called Greek tragedies, or these so-called tragedies that we have been reading about and going through tonight for whatever reason, is exactly what I'm saying. Why they've happened the way that they happen. Because all of these things that they're telling us shouldn't be is actually the opposite. And it's only like this because this is how they've injected themselves in history, because they didn't exist in the history that they're talking to us about. So yeah, they'll make what's the name in there. They'll throw Napita Nyong'o, who is an African, right? Who grew up in Mexico. You see what I'm saying? Like she's an African who grew up in Mexico. And so they'll come up with all of these different perspectives and all of this, but they're not going to tell you that Agamemnon was actually Ethiopian and that his cousin was also the same. They're not going to do that. They say it's the Bronze Age. It was the Bronze Age because they was using bronze. Yeah, well, what color is bronze? You know what I'm saying? What color is bronze? You can also look this up. Read this. Hold Give me a second. I can't find it. One second. Yeah, you could check this out. Get more into that. You could also just look up Black Greek, Black Mycenaean pottery, and you'll see all of that. This gets into the origins of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, who are the real so-called Greeks. It's another example of what they look like. Excuse me. Yeah. So when you're dealing with the amalgamation and all of that, all of that came way later with the double crosses. The double crosses meaning the degenerate Moors who started to make these people and create all of these offshoots. But again, that came way towards the end of the reign, not at the beginning, not even at the middle. The last 700, 800 years, they talking about the Moors running, that was towards the end. So they always going to tell you about the end, but never about the actual thing, because there is no time that they could actually ascribe to that. Let me see. Mm. Oh yeah. Read this real quick. Hold up. Mm, this map of Morocco is from the CIA. I showed it before, but it's okay to show it again. Here we go. The European conquerors used color of law, color of office, color of authority to control the Moors' economic, political life. Moabite Moorish woman. The Moorish woman provides nourishment and sustenance for her offspring through the placenta while her offspring is in her womb, and while her breast after she or he is born. Her companion, the earth, which is the womb, continues to nourish the offspring. The offspring's identification and recognition of his nativity is the Moorish nationality. The Moors used the Europeans' political of enslaving brands indicates the lack of public recognition of their nativity nationality. See, this is why this is haram. I don't care if you put a seven in this or whatever. I don't see this as to do anything with Moors or the Moorish Empire. This is all about controlling the Moorish Empire. Because would you walk around with a picture of you holding a sword over your mother's head? Would you walk around with a T-shirt with you holding a sword over your mom's head? Would you do that? No. So if you wouldn't do that, why would you do this? Noble Jew Ali and the removal of the scimitar. See that? The picture showing Noble Jew Ali holding an unconscious Moorish woman with humanity written on her womb displayed the Moorish Science Temple of America's questionnaire is a clear sign that Noble Jew Ali laid the foundation to remove the scimitar from above the head of the Moabite Moorish woman. This was indeed a solid indication that Noble Jew Ali was directing Moors' attention to the source of their economy and the keys to how to reclaim their birthright. In this famous call to national attention, Noble Jew Ali emphasized the importance of nationality and birthright. So when he removed the scimitar from the head, these Moors came and put it back up there. And now they're walking around with this on medallions and shit and acting like that this is somehow what he wanted. So again, next time you see them with that and they got a problem with it, or what I'm saying or what somebody else saying, ask them to go home, get a sword, take a picture of them holding a sword over their mother's head and put that on a t-shirt and walk around with that. If you're not willing to do that, then you shouldn't be doing the opposite because it don't make no sense. It's maladapted. We have surpassed that. That's for the Shriners who are keeping the secret of their shame. We're not supposed to be ashamed of that. We're not supposed to be ashamed of our women. That's what they do. Stop trying to be like them and be yourself. Here go Grenada. Here in America. So I don't know what else to, I don't know what else to say. Here again are all the Barbary nations in Southeast America, i.e. Southeast Africa, Northwest Southeast Africa. So again, if they're not willing to do that, then I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're trying to prove or who they trying to fool, because it really don't make no sense. If you could do one, then you could do the other, right? Okay. Anybody have any questions about anything before we get up out of here? Yeah, can I speak on what's happening in China? They are creating a sub economy by which they're showing the world how to technologically move forward by creating AI programs that are still under their control but are actually doing something for their population. Now, there's a huge section of the population that's still not correct, that they still exploiting and killing and organ harvesting and shit, but you'll never hear that because they don't let all of that get out too much. So that's what's happening with that. And they're preparing for their ultimate move, like I said, to take Taiwan, to have North Korea take South Korea, and basically take control of the whole Far East. And they're more in their right to do that now because the United States don't have no more leverage because of the small hats and everything else that's happening. The fires in Canada is to hide all of the undercover stuff that they're doing in terms of the war that they're actually fighting with the people that's underground there coming out, that they've been smoking out, or that's been basically shutting down their government because of the fact that their government is totally co-opted, because China has really infiltrated more of Canada's government than America's, because America went and United States came and shut down most of the Chinese police stations that was out here. And now that the boycott is happening that we've initiated, they don't have the financial influence to move forward with anything, so that's over. Also, a retraction real quick: the Mr. Mountain Beast that I was talking about, that was showing the stuff in the Grand Canyon, that's actually was in Petra. That was really at Petra. That wasn't the Grand Canyon, so he was capping on that. Also, another retraction from what I was talking about with Albert Perry. He actually was born in Florida and then moved up to South Carolina, which again shows what I was saying even more. You know, so with that, please, if you can, subscribe to check me out at www.aseertheducateers.com, so you can see all the stuff I got popping there. Let me pull it up for you real quick. Definitely, if you can, check me out there. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the ADOT app. I'm always putting it out there. Also, please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. I'm striving to get at least to 60,000 by the end of the summer. If you could finally help me reach that goal, I greatly appreciate it. Here's what it looks like. Greatly appreciate it. If you could look out, that would be great. Also, if you haven't, please check out www.cordovaorganics.com. for all your skincare needs and body health needs. That would be great. Also, if you want to donate, because again, we don't have any corporate sponsorship or anything like that. So if you want to donate or pass it on to somebody who you know can donate, I definitely appreciate it. I would like to do more than one video a week. So if anybody watches this stuff or has been watching for as long as you have, I would really appreciate it if you slide something to us, because it helps. And again, the more I have, the more I'm able to create more content that goes directly to you and not through some filter or somebody else. You know what I'm saying? Of course. Again, every little bit helps. Fiat, silver, whatever. I appreciate all of it. If you can share, if you can subscribe, support the products, support the books, support whatever we're doing, it helps. Because like I said, I don't have, you know what I mean, any extraneous low key, angel investors coming through to help. And for as many people that watch, it would be great if everybody that has watched or can watch can send something, because again, it helps me keep it going. Because again, I'd like to start to do more than one a week. However, I still got to do other stuff to make stuff happen. So I really appreciate the support. Anybody else have any other questions? Indeed, I'm still striving to stay consistent and speak directly to what's happening while keeping a anchor to what our foundation is. You know what I'm saying? Instead of getting caught up in the political and the conscious set tripping that be going on in this space. Unfortunately, whatever you are, so long as you know that you are born from the land and you original autochthonous, I'm down with you. You know what I'm saying? Because in the end, we all we got. And I hope this class illustrated as to why and how all of this stuff is related, because they keep running the same game. So let's become the game masters, you know what I'm saying? Or the dungeon master, so that way we can control what the gameplay is. All right? So long live the empire, Proconium Laudibus Nobilis, Pax et Amor. If anybody has any other questions, consultations, bookings, lectures, whatever, hit me up at houseofel@hotmail.com. Everybody that's been hitting me up on the app for consultations and stuff, don't worry, we're going to be working it out soon. Where I'll send you a message through the joint, and then we'll be able to do lives or whatever through the app. All right. So again, thanks for the support. Please subscribe, hit the hype button, the like button. And let's try to get at least to 60,000 by the end of the summer, inshallah. All right. All right, y'all. Peace.